Hello and welcome to the Business Today show. I'm Udayan Mukherjee. My guest today, in one sense, is a founding father of the Indian passenger car industry. It would not be a stretch to call him that, because 40 years ago, around this time, he laid the foundation stone for what was to become the defining story of the Indian automobile industry with Maruti. And he's still standing tall at the end of 40 years as the chairman of Maruti Suzuki. R.C. Bhargava is with me today. Mr. Bhargava, it's a great pleasure to have you on the show and wonderful to see you again.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here.
40 years is a long time, but what is the fondest part when you look back at this journey of 40 years since you started? I mean, what really stands out for you?
I think what stands out to me is where we've reached without ever having thought that we will ever reach here. It's just been one step by one step we have taken, and never realizing that we are going to be the fourth largest car manufacturer in the world, and that we have changed so many things in India in these 40 years. Never imagined this would happen.
I thought you would surprise me by saying that the fondest part is your long-term relationship with Osamu Suzuki. I mean, I wasn't around 40 years ago to witness it, but very rarely do you see a business partnership of such a long and enduring time. I mean, I'm sure there must be some anecdotes of your friendship with the great old man.
Oh, there are lots of events with him, but fundamentally, I think when we met for the first time, and that was in the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo in March 1982, there was some kind of chemistry between us, and Mr. Suzuki thought that Krishnamurti and I were two people who he could trust and work with. And that became the basis of his agreeing to come to India, sign up with the government of India, where everybody was saying, don't do it, it's a bad investment. And after that, this trust has only got stronger. We've become very good friends, and on several occasions he has stood by me. He has stood by me against the government of India. He has gone to court against the government of India to back me up. All kinds of things have happened in this period.
Maruti is a remarkable journey because, you started as a public sector company, and at some point along the way, it became a company owned by a multinational giant like Suzuki. So you've had, from your purse, the opportunity to observe it from a public sector character molding into a multinational private sector owned company. But would it be fair to say that Maruti would not have been today had it not passed from the public sector over to the private sector with Suzuki controlling a majority stake?
I think it's fair to say that if this had not happened, we would not be anywhere near where we are today. Even as a public sector company, we were still very successful. Those days, there was no competition then, and we had got, in 1997, 98, we had got to some 82, 83% of the passenger car market. And we were profitable, we were growing, we were doing well. But the kind of growth we have witnessed afterwards, that would not have happened. The ease of working would not have been there. And as we saw in the period when 95 till about 99, things with government can go sour quite easily. Politics comes in.
What is the core issue, Mr. Bhargava? I mean, if you can speak candidly, I mean, is it a work culture issue? Is it a technology transfer issue? What is it between
it's a number
which is the
of issues.
dividing line between the public and the private sector?
See, there are various aspects. First is the legal aspect. Working as a public sector company, you are an instrument of state in terms of the Constitution, which means all the fundamental rights can be enforced against you. People can take you to court for giving a contract or hiring a guy or doing almost any business decision. Like we were taken to court for having a manufacturer's quota and how that manufacturer's quota was being utilized to allot cars. So that is one part of it. Then, because you're a public sector, you have to comply with a whole lot of government rules and regulations. You're under supervisory jurisdiction of a number of people. Your audit is done by the CAG, which is very different from really a commercial audit, where procedure becomes more important than the results, where time has really no value. And so all these things happen which make it difficult to work. Then there is the question of government control. Even though theoretically a PSU is a board-managed company, in practice it is not, because the fact that government is the appointing authority of the CMD and the directors, that is always in the background of people and their decision making and their approach to government requests of various kinds and such things. So you don't have that. The whole question of incentives, accountability and motivation is very different in a government company and a private company. So with all these factors, I am convinced that in terms of the basic structure of public sector companies and the way they have to be managed and the compliance issues and the legal issues, the public sector companies are heavily weighted to not perform as well as private sector companies.
That's very interesting coming from you, Mr. Bhargava. So if you were in the finance minister's shoes today, would you say that it makes sense, eminent sense, to actually go for privatization of most industries where the government has large companies, barring a few?
Oh, absolutely. The issues are not the economic issues. There are political issues in privatization which are important. There are the issues of unions and managing the unions and the labor problems which are issues. If it's pure economics where one didn't have to look at the other aspects, I think government would privatize immediately. But unfortunately, in our country, that's not always possible.
Now, your journey started 40 years ago, but the turf, as you said, was very different. You were the first car manufacturer. There was no competition. In a sense, you were a monopoly. I mean, 40 years later, you were a giant of a brand with billions of dollars of cash in your portfolio. However, the turf has changed. I mean, the market is very competitive right now. But do you think today Maruti at 40 faces a very different kind of challenge going forward, which is surviving and maintaining its salience in a very competitive scenario?
We've had competition quite a long time. The car industry was delicensed in 1993. After that, global companies have started entering India, and particularly from around 97, 98 onwards, in the next few years, almost every global car company has been in India. So competition from the best in the world has always been there. The nature of competition is changing because, and has changed from time to time. It was originally, the first challenge came when diesel became a very major fuel which people preferred. So petrol versus diesel became a competitive point in the industry. Then now we have seen that with the way the car prices have gone because of regulations and state government taxes and such things, cost factors have become more and more important. Now technology is changing, and that is bringing new elements into competition. The SUV market has become another factor in the competition. So the conditions are changing. The factors which are determining where you have to compete and how you have to compete are changing. And I think this will continue all the time. This is not an industry where you can sit back and say, now things are stable, I have to do nothing further.
No, you're right in pointing out that Maruti is no stranger to competition. But through these phases that you just outlined, Maruti has always managed to maintain a market share of very close to 50%. It's only in the recent past that it has slipped to about 43%, and I think in one of the recent quarters it even went down as low as 41%. This never happened even in times of the transition to diesel, etc. Do you think something is fundamentally changing, which is raising the threat of Maruti losing its near 50% kind of stranglehold on the Indian market?
No, then if I remember correctly, around 2011-12, we had also dropped around 40% when diesel took over and petrol cars dropped drastically in their demand in the market. The same things happened in the last 3 years. The demand for small cars has dropped very substantially. I think we've gone down 28 to 29% in the lower end of the market. Whereas the market for SUVs has taken off, not for all big cars, but just for the SUV segment. And that's one segment where we were not present at that time in any sizable number. So this up and down in the market share has happened in the past. We have recovered from around 41% to 50% some years ago. I'm pretty sure that this is going to happen again.
Do you see this shift that you just spoke about, the fact that the small market has shrunk in terms of its share of the overall car market to a fraction of what it was, and SUVs have grown in dominance? This to be an enduring theme going forward, or do you see small cars bouncing back? I mean, what are the fundamental factors why prices of cars of less than 5 lakh rupees in price have gone down so significantly in terms of sales?
Because the percentage increase in the price of this segment of the car has gone up much more due to the new regulations, as well as the increase in state government taxes. Now, to get this to bounce back, it's either incomes of people have to grow, which may take 2, 3, 4 years to happen, or the whole tax structure may need to be corrected at some point if government looks at the small sector and thinks that it's not a good thing for it to go down so much. Otherwise, I think for the next few years, till the economy grows and per capita incomes at lower levels increase and purchasing power increase, I think the small sector will remain depressed, and we will have to concentrate more in the bigger segment.
So you just alluded to regulatory costs, which brings me to the point of, the tragic accident of Cyrus Mistry. I mean, this brings to the fore all these issues of 6 airbags. I know you're not exactly a critic, but you've had your reservations about those kind of regulations and how much they will add to already inflated costs of cars. But do you think they will actually now make the regulators even more press ahead, even more on things like 6 airbags and such safety regulations?
If you look at the unfortunate accident of Mr. Cyrus Mistry, he was in the safest of cars. This car had 6 or maybe more airbags. And the people in the front survived, the people at the back did not, for the simple reason that apparently, from what all accounts show, the people in the front had their seat belts on, whereas people at the back did not have their seat belts on. And I think it's quite clear from this that what is the most important factor for safety is the need for people, even in back seats, to wear seat belts. If they do not wear seat belts, having the safest of cars and the best of airbags as Mercedes has, Mercedes does not do anything which is not absolutely top class. It still doesn't help. They died on the spot. The people in the front are in hospital. Hopefully they will recover soon.
So
unfortunately,
you maintain your position that 6 airbags and all these things are not really essential?
No, they are important. But more important is to get people to keep their seat belts fastened all the time, even in the back seat. Unfortunately, in India, not even 5% of the people on the back seats put on their seat belts, not even 5%. Now, my point is that first, please get people to start using seat belts on the back seats. Till that time, putting airbags is not going to make life safer for them.
Let me come back to the point that we were discussing on small cars versus SUVs. You did say that for the next few years, small cars might still have a challenging road ahead. But therefore, it must fall on the Maruti leadership to try and up its share of the SUV market or internally, therefore, change its business mix between small cars and large cars.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
think you have the products at hand to make yourself a strong player in the SUV market? Do you think the Grand Vitara will deliver that for you?
The Grand Vitara is the first of the SUVs which are coming, and you've seen the response has been enormous, both for the model which we will be selling and the version which Toyota will be selling. Fundamentally, they are both, the strong hybrid version is the same car for both companies. We have also the mild hybrid version in it. And then, as our MD has said, there are other SUVs in the pipeline which will come later in a few months or next year.
So, you don't think you've conceded that space completely to the M&Ms of the world?
Not at all. I think coming in a little bit late has its own advantages. And for us, it has given us this advantage of bringing in the strong hybrid technology into India. We have also had recent reports which show that the sedan market is once again recovering. And we don't know, I mean, nobody can say for certainty that the SUV market will continue to grow for all times in India. You know, these trends tend to change over time, and one doesn't know when they will change.
Interesting you say that sometimes being late comes with its own advantages. Do you see it that way for the electric vehicle foray as well, where it seems like companies like Tata Motors and M&M have stolen a bit of a march in terms of time versus you?
Sure, but only time will tell whether Maruti in the long term will suffer because of it. I don't think we will, but let's see.
How ambitious are your plans on the electric vehicles front? Because, you know, I've heard you in certain fora talk about electric vehicles being a few years away, and maybe hybrid is going to be taking center stage first before we get to electric vehicles. Are you optimistic about electric vehicles per se, or do you think people are overestimating the potential in the near term, in the next 3 to 5 years?
My view on the near term is that it will not become the major product in the market. And the reason is that we still, despite the slowing down in the small car market, the small car component of the total market is still very large. It's still around 70% or so, or maybe a little above 70%. And that market is not going to be very easy for the electric vehicle to penetrate. And that's basically because of cost, because of considerations over range, because considerations over the charging infrastructure, because of the electric grid problems which may come up when more and more electric cars come into the market. I know these are all areas where a lot of work is being done to create the infrastructure and look at all these problems, but they will take time and resources, and that's not easily available. So I do believe that while we will push to a maximum for the electric vehicle segment, and we will start vehicles in the upper end of the market, but going down to the lower end will require some improvements in technology which lower costs, it requires infrastructure building, and it requires people's incomes to increase.
But what makes you so optimistic about hybrid cars, Mr. Bhargava? Because in that, you seem to be the lone voice. While one takes the view that, or agrees with you that on emission, hybrid cars will be much better than diesel cars, but on power, hybrid usually would be much lower than diesel cars, would it not? And would it then not come in the way of it becoming a significant segment?
No, that's not a fact. Hybrid cars are very, very competitive with diesel cars. If you look at what's been happening in Europe, the diesel segment has been going down and the hybrids have been taken over because cost-wise, the hybrid cars are now very competitive and there's nothing lacking on the power front. But I'm not at all saying that diesel will be replaced by hybrid and the hybrid and electrics are the only option. My view has been that we have a large growing market for cars in India. We have a range of cars from small cars to the big cars. And in this pace and in what's happening, there is scope for all kinds of fuels to happen. The CNG cars, for example, are growing very fast, and they will be much, much more than hybrids and electrics for many years to come, because the CNG cars are basically suitable for the small car market. We are blending ethanol. That's already 10%. We'll move up to 20%. That's again an important thing. I believe in a few years we will have a lot of biogas coming into the market, which is a totally renewable fuel and is carbon negative. I think that's going to play an important role. So what I'm saying is that in the nature of our market, which is a growing market unlike other markets, there is going to be scope for different fuels. And electric will be pushed by all to the extent possible, but at the same time, that will still leave room for other fuels and technologies.
Talking of technology, Mr. Bhargava, where are things on the semiconductor shortage front? Because that, for the last couple of years, has been such a big hamstringing factor for the Indian auto industry.
Yeah.
Do you think things are better now, or is the worst behind us, or could it return to plague the sector again?
At the moment, the situation is better. This year, we seem to be on a road to do higher production than ever before. And I'm hoping that this trend will continue in the coming years, that people will have had time to jack up the production of semiconductors and the chips which we require, and that the worst is now behind us. I hope so.
Do you fear that geopolitics might actually make it worse? I mean, given China's recent noises about what their views on Taiwan are, which is the center for the global semiconductor industry, could there be shocks along the way in the future as well?
Well, you know, this Ukraine crisis nobody had foreseen a couple of years ago. So these kind of events one can't see in advance, one can't forecast, and one has to assume that these things will not happen. If they do happen, then they will cause a shock.
Well, Mr. Bhargava, we'll end our conversation now. We're out of time, but my sincere compliments and congratulations to you for what has been nothing short of a stellar career. And as I said, you truly are a founding father of the Indian auto industries and a great inspiration to the whole industry and manufacturing generally. But thank you very much for your time today, and all the best for the future.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Udayan. Thank you.